Grace and peace. Apostle Cheryl Richardson here. Let me set about tagging folk while I'm thinking about it. Hey there. Congratulations on your play, Mr. Dana. Wish I could be there to see it. Jonathan's got me excited about it. I wish I could see it. So thanks for joining us. We're going to be talking about domestic violence, of course. Hey, Katie. I'm going to ask you all to share as you come on. You know I'm not good at remembering to say that. Hey, Ree. You're always one of the first 2 or 3 people on. I appreciate your support. I pray that you all have had a blessed weekend and that the past week wasn't too awful and that God showed himself strong in your life. We certainly appreciate all that he's doing for us. His faithfulness is endless. It's endless. He's not moody like us, okay? He is faithful and he doesn't change. And I don't know about you, but I count on that every single day, okay? I absolutely count on that every single day of my life. So if you would share, I would appreciate it. Today's topic, hey Kelly, today's topic is going to be abuse in later life. And I think it's important that we talk about it because most times when we think about domestic violence, we think about, young couples. We've talked about the fact that teenagers experience teen dating violence, that it's a tremendous problem worldwide, that, young people are murdered because they're involved in domestic violence situations. We know that women ages 18 to 24 experience domestic violence at a high rate. That's typically, hey, my brother's on, hey, Herb. That teens experience it, as early as middle school and in high school. And we also know, because we've talked about this in previous broadcasts, that when children are exposed to it in childhood, then they tend to seek this out in later life, all right? So when we're talking about later life, now we're talking about senior citizens, okay? We're talking about senior citizens and the effect that abuse has on them. And it's not a topic that is discussed that often. And it's interesting because they're some of the most vulnerable in our population, all right? And so when we talk about domestic violence as it relates to seniors, it becomes intermingled and intertwined with elder abuse. Okay, so we're going to talk about the difference between those two things. And we're also going to talk about why domestic violence in later life is often overlooked, okay? I'm going to give you some statistics because I always like to back up what I'm saying to you all with facts, so I'm not just making this stuff up, okay? But we spent a whole lot of time researching and wanting to understand how we can best bring this thing under subjection. Hey, Jason. And so, again, if you would share, we put our information also at the top of the broadcast if you want to sow or donate, help us to continue to carry this message forward. The Lord has given us an expanded vision, and honestly, like I think I told you all a few weeks ago, I don't think it's changed since he gave it to me. I just think that my ability to grasp it has improved somewhat, okay? But it's huge, and I certainly can't accomplish it without you, and I absolutely won't even attempt to accomplish it without him. So again, today's topic is elder abuse in later life, of domestic violence in later life. One of the things that I want to point out that I think is important is that because many case managers associate elder abuse with caregiver stress, oftentimes they don't assess for actual domestic violence. I'm going to say that again. Because many case managers, clinicians, therapists, even general practitioners associate elder abuse with caregiver stress, with the caregiver flipping out, with the caregiver becoming abusive because they are overwhelmed, because they are feeling stressed. They don't assess for domestic violence specifically. And because many seniors have been raised in a culture wherein what happens in this house stays in this house. You don't discuss your relationship outside of the house. If you are a spiritual or religious person, then you cover the faults of your spouse, which means that you don't expose your spouse to public ridicule and ultimately accountability for being abusive because you've been taught within the culture to keep things private, right? And to not put them in a bad light, to not jeopardize their job or their status or their appearance to others outside of the home. And all of that lends to isolation, which we know is a foundational fertilizer for all kinds of abuse. In isolation, it is able to grow and take root, right? And really wreak some destruction. And so, because it's not assessed, oftentimes it's not even addressed. Okay, so I'm going to say it one more time. Many times case managers associate abuse in later life with caregiver stress, and they don't assess specifically for domestic violence, which would give the elder that is being mistreated access to various options that they are often not aware of because no one knows that they're being abused. Okay. If you have any information, because I know I have people on here who are professionals, as myself, and if you want to chime in or make a statement, feel free. If you have a question, if I'm not able to answer it while I'm on because I'm already multitasking, then I promise at the end of the broadcast that I will go back on and answer every single question, address every comment. Okay? All right. And please share. Okay, so let's look at this. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, I'd like for you to know where I'm getting my facts from, okay? There is an estimated 13.5% of older adults who have suffered emotional abuse since the age of 60. Since the age of 60. They may have gone their entire life and not experienced it. But there are 13.5% of older adults that have suffered emotional abuse since the age of 60. So it's like once they hit a place where they were recognized as fragile or vulnerable or dependent or limited somehow. Maybe they've got mental health issues. Maybe they have physical, health issues. They don't have the strength that they had when they were younger. They don't have the agility that they had when they were younger. They may not process things as quickly as they did when they were younger. They become more vulnerable. All right. 76.1% of physical abuse towards older adults is perpetrated by a family member. 76.1% of abuse that is perpetrated against older adults, we're talking about physical abuse right now, is perpetrated by a family member. It's someone in the family, okay? A majority of elder sexual abuse cases involve female victims and male perpetrators, which aligns itself with the statistics for domestic violence in terms of the general population. We know that men can be victims too, but we know that the majority of the time, the reported cases, because that's all we can talk about is what we know about, right? The reported cases are male perpetrators against female victims, okay? Only 1 out of 24 cases of elder abuse is reported. So I'm going to throw a question out there. Why do you think it is that only 1 out of 24 cases is reported? I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are. Why do you think it's not reported? There are several different reasons, many of them which align themselves with the reasons that any victim is not reporting abuse. Okay, but when you think about the vulnerability, the limited resources possibly, the limited independence, how their lives have changed, since they've become a senior, the limitations that they deal with, it may be physical, it may be emotional or whatever. All of these things will be barriers to them reporting abuse. Because if I'm 70 years old and I complain that I'm being abused, where am I going? Where am I going? So that's a scary proposition for a victim who is at the prime of their life, who's in their 20s or 30s or 40s, has the ability to find another job, to get another place to stay, to get new job training or whatever so that they can maintain their independence. An older adult is limited in terms of what their real options are, and what options are even available to them to pursue. Okay? Only 1 out of 24 cases of elder abuse is reported, and I'd like to hear why you all think that is. And then 2/3 of perpetrators are adult children or spouses. So this is where the domestic violence piece comes in. So 2/3 of the perpetrators, right? We said 76.1% of those who are abusing the elderly are family members, okay? And 2/3 of that 76%, right? That means you could say roughly 50%. 2/3 of that are adult children or spouses. So when you think about on an emotional level, what that betrayal must feel like, that the people that, if they're adult children, these are people that you have raised and that you have poured into and that you have nurtured and that you have provided for, who are now abusing you, or a spouse who you've been committed to, and now that you're vulnerable, they are abusing you, okay? Consider this. If you're in a room of 20 older adults, know that 2 of them are potential victims. So if you're in a room with 20 older adults, say you went to a bingo game or you went somewhere else where they're congregating, 2 out of 20 of them are potential victims. It's not reported because they're afraid people won't believe them. Absolutely, Jakayla. That's the absolute truth. They don't think that people will believe them, which is a reason that oftentimes younger people don't report it as well. So imagine that you have a person who is 70, 75 years old, and they have this status in the community. They've accomplished the major things that they're going to accomplish in life, right? They're known for what they're known for, whatever it is. People have this opinion of them. They have this opinion of their partner or their family member, all right? And so they've got this opinion, and who's going to believe? Who's going to believe that the person that you've been with for 30 years is abusing you? Who's going to believe that? Especially if they've not presented that in the community, all right? Also not reported because they are protecting the family member that has hurt them. Exactly. So if I'm the victim, maybe I am hesitant to report that I'm being mistreated because I don't want to ruin the reputation of my loved one, my partner, my child, okay, my partner. The McGowans are here. Thanks for joining. Okay, so that's a good point too also, Jakayla. Murder-suicide is rare in the general population, but it's found at higher rates among older adults. Why do you think that is? Murder-suicide, and they happen a lot, but they happen at a lower rate among younger people. And we have found that it happens at an increased rate among older people. So why do we think that is? There are reasons for that as well, okay? Now, when I first came on, I mentioned that because many case managers associate elder abuse with caregiver stress, they don't assess for domestic violence. And they're very, very similar, but they're 2 slightly different things with very similar dynamics, right? But there are resources that are available specifically for people who are victims of domestic violence. But if it's never assessed, or if the assumption is, well, your caregiver is just stressed and that's all that's happening, and they just need to go to an anger management class, or they just need respite care to come in so that they're not mean to you, then the root of the problem is never actually addressed, okay? Let's see. So, abuse in later life comprises financial. Now, this is going to sound familiar because it has a whole lot to do with, I know I need to tag some other folks. I'm still talking now. Okay, so it has a whole lot to do with domestic violence. The way that we've been addressing it, the way that we've been studying it and looking at it, it has a whole lot to do with that, okay? So it's very, very, very similar. You just want to look at who's doing it and under what conditions that they're doing it. And the challenges that older adults face is that they've got this reputation that's already established. They're already known for whatever they're known for. And it's almost like if they were to say that they were being mistreated, that they are now destroying their legacy, so to speak. They are impugning the character of a family member or a loved one or their partner. They are damaging a reputation that maybe it took them years to establish, okay? It's not unusual for an abuser to present as charming and charismatic. We've talked about this. To present as charming and charismatic and all of that in public, and then be a completely different entity behind closed doors. Or if you are a church person, after the benediction, you know, they bring this rousing message. They lay hands on the sick, and, you know, people love them, and the service is amazing. And then they go home and they torture people. They torment people verbally. They're verbally abusive or physically abusive or emotionally abusive or financially abusive or, you know, utilizing coercive control all of the time. And so you can never really tell from the outside. And you'd be amazed at who's actually suffering in silence and not saying anything at all. So it's important that we're able to recognize, I'm trying to tag folk. Y'all know I'm not good at this. At remembering to do it. So it's important that we are able to recognize some of the symptoms of it, because it's not always just that this person is a senior person and that the person who's providing their care or taking care of them, maybe they have health challenges, maybe they have developed mental health challenges, maybe they've just had surgery or they're bedridden or whatever. It doesn't mean that it's primarily caregiver stress that's causing it. Hey, Cassie. So it's important that we're educated so that we know what we're looking at, what we're looking for. Okay, so to recap, because case managers typically, hey there. So because case managers oftentimes will assume that abuse of the elderly is connected to caregiver stress, they won't assess for domestic violence, which is somewhat different and requires a different angle of approach in order to bring the proper resources to bear on the situation. Hey, Alicia. Okay, so I've shared some statistics with you, all right? Abuse in later life comprises financial, physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, also abandonment and neglect, okay? Perpetrators are the people with whom the victim has an expectation of trust, just like in domestic violence, okay? Spouses, intimate partners, adult children, grandchildren, other family members, and non-related caregivers. So maybe the person that comes in to take care of them for a few hours while you go out, or while you go to work, or you take them to an adult daycare place and they're mistreated there, okay? And so the perpetrators are people whom the victim should be able to trust, and that's what makes it so devastating, okay? Just as any other form of domestic violence. Typically, but not always, the abuse will occur in the residence of the victim. Why is that? No witnesses. No witnesses. That's why. No witnesses. Chances are, if you have an elderly person, they may have an intimate partner, they may have a spouse, but they probably don't have a house full of people. There's not a whole lot of people around to act as a buffer or to observe that maltreatment is occurring, or to even act as a deterrent to maltreatment. And so oftentimes they're left alone with the person who is mistreating them, okay? Every year, approximately 4 million older Americans are victims of physical, psychological, and or other forms of abuse and neglect. Every year, okay? And it's an approximate number because most of the time, it's not reported, right? We've already talked about the fact that only 1 in 20 cases are even reported, all right? Ashley, hey there. I miss you. Older adults who require assistance with daily living activities are at increased risk of being emotionally abused or financially exploited. Now, this can be tied to caregiver stress in terms of them needing additional care. It's not unlike with children who are considered behavioral problems, who have emotional issues, or who are hyperactive and struggle with being still and maintaining focus or whatever. Their presence can be disruptive, and it creates a high stress situation for whoever is responsible for caring for them. All right. And so it's important to differentiate, though, between caregiver stress and domestic violence. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. But if they need extra help, if they are confined to a wheelchair, if they are not completely mobile, if they can no longer drive their vehicle, if they can no longer do their grocery shopping, then it means that someone else has to step in and take care of them. Hey, Rosalind, someone else has to step in and take care of them. And that is a challenge, right, for those who are doing it. And if they already have emotional issues going on, then it's a trigger. It's a trigger, okay? All right. So, hey, Rosalind. Okay. Clothes stolen. Okay, we're going to talk about that. There's another way, though, that abuse occurs that the elderly experience it with their belongings disappearing, okay? So we understand that those who require assistance are at a higher risk of being emotionally abused or financially exploited, all right? Dr. G, hey there. Approximately 50% of older adults with dementia are mistreated or abused. 50% of older adults with dementia, okay, are mistreated or abused. And only 15.5% of elder sexual abuse is reported to police. Oftentimes, they're not in a position where they can talk about it. And if you're talking about an elder person, a person that's older, from a cultural standpoint, now we're talking about culture again, regardless of race, that generation was taught not to talk about things, certainly not sexual, outside of the home. And it was viewed as shameful, and it was something that you did not share. And so this is how they have grown up. This is how they have lived their life, and this is how they have been raised. So they're not very likely to share. And in some cases, they're impaired because of health challenges or emotional challenges, and they're not even able to verbalize that they have been maltreated, all right? Pastor Shonda, welcome. Okay, so abuse in later life often results in physical and psychological harm. So if a young person, if a teen or a child is severely damaged by abuse and the brain is rewired and the ability to process things is negatively impacted, how much more do you think the damage is to an elderly person? To an elderly person who has accomplished all that they're going to accomplish in life in terms of starting anything new, building anything new, whatever legacy they have established is denigrated and it is destroyed when they are mistreated, okay? Now, we're going to look at some of the things that you can look for with a loved one, even if they're in a care facility. I would almost say especially if they're in a care facility, okay? You need to watch those folks, okay? Some of the indicators of emotional abuse are denigration or humiliation, that the way that they're being spoken to, the tone of voice that's being used when they're being addressed. Coercive control tactics. Now that should sound familiar because we've talked about it in terms of domestic violence in general. And so coercive control, when it comes to the elderly, can look like restricting access to the telephone, restricting access to their transportation, destroying or damaging their property, dismissing or minimizing their needs, okay? Whatever they need is not important. Whatever they need, it can wait. Being humiliated because they express a need can be an indication of emotional abuse, okay? The indicators of physical abuse in the elderly, or anybody, but we're talking about the elderly today, are broken bones, sprains, fractures, dislocations. And you've got to be careful with that because oftentimes as we get older, we lose mobility, we lose a sense of balance, and it's not unusual for the elderly to have falls, but you want to make sure that that's actually what's happening and that someone's not helping them to fall, okay? Are they really falling? Is it a legitimate thing? And is it because they don't have what they need? Do they need a walker and they're not being provided a walker? Do they need a cane and they're not being provided a cane? These are all forms of abuse, okay? So some other things that you can look for are burns from cigarettes, hot water or appliances, abrasions on extremities that are indicative of physical restraints, that they've been tied down or whatever, okay? Bruises, including wraparound bruises, delay between the onset of an injury and seeking medical attention. So if they do fall on their own, are they taken to the doctor? Are they taken to the hospital? Did they fall on their own? What's really going on in the home there, okay? Neglect of bedridden adults' injuries like bed sores. So we already talked about the fact that if an elderly person has additional needs, that they have physical needs, they're not mobile, they're not able to prepare their own meals or whatever. If they require extra attention, they are at a greater risk of being abused. And this is even with an intimate partner, okay? Financial abuse includes, but is not limited to, fraud, forced property transfers. And when I say forced, I mean even manipulated into transferring property. You're going to transfer your house that you've had for 40 years into the hands of a cousin that you haven't seen in 40 years. And you've got people around you who've been caring for you the entire time. Okay? And so you want to really pay attention to the people around you that are older because they are vulnerable. They are vulnerable. Misuse or theft of money or possessions. Alicia mentioned that she had some clothes stolen. Use of deception to coerce or convince a victim to surrender finances or property. So talking them into giving away things in a manner in which they normally would not do it. Okay. Hi, Cynthia. Now, we mentioned murder-suicide a little while ago, and I said that it happens usually more frequently in younger people, but that it does occur at a more frequent rate among older people. So if someone thinks that they have an idea about why that might be more frequent with the elderly, with older adults, then please feel free to throw it up here on the screen. All right. There are at least 3 types of murder-suicide among older adults. And we're still talking about abuse in later life, okay? Number 1, couples characterized by dependency where one or both partners are sick and the man is dominant in the relationship. So the first example, the first set of circumstances under which murder-suicide may happen in older adults is when the couples are characterized by dependency where one or both partners are sick and the man is dominant in the relationship. Okay? Now, why is that so critical? Because again, we're talking about culture, and you're talking about older adults. You're talking about later life, and that particular generation came up with the man being dominant. That was understood. It was accepted. It was rarely challenged. And that's kind of the way they live. And that's how they have maintained, most likely, that relationship, that marriage. Another example would be the partners have a history of intimate partner violence. Now consider this. Hey, Susan, now consider this. If abuse is more frequently observed in women 18 to 24, right? We're not talking about, hey, Dr. Jen, we're not talking about childhood domestic violence. But even if you've not experienced it in childhood, then when you hit about 18, 19, 20, that's, coming out of high school, going into college, then you have the whole teen dating violence thing that's going on. Because people have been exposed to it in childhood or whatever, when you look at that, a person who is an abuser, who has not addressed why they are an abuser seriously, and most of them don't, but every now and again somebody does, okay? it's not going to magically go away as they get older. And so sometimes medical professionals, mental health professionals, don't even assess for it because it doesn't occur to them that this 68, 69, 70, 75-year-old man might be abusing his spouse, might be abusing his intimate partner. It doesn't occur to anyone that this woman who is in her 70s is a victim of domestic violence. Most likely she's a victim, and most likely she's been a victim for a very long time. For a very long time. And raised in a setting where it was understood, it was very patriarchal in orientation, that the man is the head of the house. The man is the head of the relationship, and whatever he says goes, period, okay? So that's the second example. Number 3, that the relationship is characterized by extreme interdependence. So extreme interdependence would mean that one cannot do anything without the other, which honestly is very unhealthy. Okay, that's not healthy. And so then, if one partner leaves, then I'm leaving. If this person is dying and I can't care for them, they have cancer, they have some debilitating illness that there's no cure for. They've been given a terminal diagnosis, and I'm old too, so I can't really help them, okay? So now murder-suicide appears to them to be the only real option. And again, if people aren't aware of how much stress that is being experienced within the home, because culturally you don't talk about these things, then there's no way to bring the proper resources to bear on the situation, okay? We're talking about abuse in later life and why oftentimes it goes unrecognized. So I'm going to go back over some of the stats that I've already shared with you. An estimated 13.5% of older adults have suffered emotional abuse since the age of 60. So it's almost like if you have people around you with abusive tendencies, right? And we know that most older adults that experience this, it is an unrelated caregiver. It's more likely than not an adult child, a grandchild, or a spouse or intimate partner that begins to mistreat them and take advantage of them, okay? So 13.5% of older adults have suffered emotional abuse since the age of 60. 76.1% of physical abuse toward older adults is perpetrated by a family member, right? It's someone that the victim should be able to reasonably expect that they can trust because of the role that they have in their life. And that's what makes it so devastating. But it's complicated by the fact that most older adults have been taught that what happens in the house stays in the house. You never say anything that's going to present your partner, your spouse, your family member in a negative light. You don't want to ruin their legacy. They're highly thought of in the community. Maybe they're the pastor. Maybe they're the deacon. Maybe they're the church mother. All right. Maybe they are a politician or a professional in the community that has helped many, many, many people. Does not mean that they're not abusing someone at home. Okay. But an older adult will be hesitant to say anything at all that's going to reflect negatively on that family member, okay? And so in a sense, it's trauma bonding because that's exactly what happens. The victim doesn't want to say, regardless of the age of the victim doesn't want to do anything that's going to bring detriment or harm in their mind to the perpetrator, okay? A majority of elder sexual abuse cases involve female victims and male perpetrators. And again, we're talking about what's reported. We can only discuss what's been reported. Only 1 out of 24 cases of elder abuse is reported. 1 out of 24 cases is reported. And Jakayla, if you go back in the comments, gave some good examples about why that is, all right? 2/3 of perpetrators are adult children or spouses. Think about that. Think about that. And most of the time, the abuse will happen, not always, but most of the time it will occur in the residence of the elderly person. Why is that? They're not getting out as much. there aren't as many people around, right? They're not as mobile. Maybe they're not driving anymore. They're not as agile. Maybe they have difficulty walking or standing for long periods of time. And so their movement is limited, and they're in their residence a lot. All right. This may also mean that they become more and more dependent on family members who may not want to be bothered, who may have abusive tendencies, or who may have ulterior motives. Okay. And I said earlier that if you're in a room of 20 older adults, know that there are 2 potential victims in the room. So if you're in a room with 20 older adults, at least 2 of them are potential victims, okay? And then we talked about the fact that murder-suicide is rare in the general population, but it's found at higher rates with older adults. And we talked about why that is and the circumstances under which that typically happens. We said that there are 3 different characteristics, 3 different sets of circumstances that tend to prevail when you find a murder-suicide in older adults. And the first one was that the couples are characterized by dependency where one or both partners are sick and the man is dominant in the relationship. So he's going to make a decision about how best to handle this for both parties, okay? And oftentimes they will say that they were putting their partner out of their misery if they just commit a murder and they don't also take their own life. And then the second example was that the partners have a history of intimate partner violence. This is not something that just goes away as people get older. You don't grow out of it. You don't age out of having an abusive personality. Okay, let's establish that. And some medical professionals assume that the older people get, the more incapable they were of being abusive. And that is not the case. Okay, so if a person is abusive at 20 and 30 and 40 and 50 and 60, certainly they don't think that there's anything wrong with them. And typically they think it's the victim's fault, that the victim triggers them and should know better. They're not going to grow out of it. They're not. If anything, it becomes more entrenched. And now there's an expectation that you're going to do what I'm told. And now you are older and you are fragile and you are vulnerable, and I can really make you now do what I want you to do. And plus, you've had years with me, so I have trained you that I'm in charge, okay? And so oftentimes it goes unassessed and it goes unnoticed. And then the other example was that the relationship is characterized by extreme interdependence, where maybe they don't have a whole lot of friends outside of the relationship and they are completely and totally dependent on one another. And so under those circumstances, you may have a murder-suicide occur as well. Now, in 2000, we entered an era that was called the aging of America. And it has been estimated that by the year 2030, we're almost in 2020, so 10, 11 years from now, there will be 70 million Americans who are over the age of 65. 70 million over the age of 65. Why? Because we're living longer. We're living longer, okay? Some other indicators of elder abuse. And I want to share these so that you know what to look for, that you know what to question, that you don't assume that that bruised elderly person just fell down. Don't assume that. And if they did fall down, do they not have what they need to help them to not do that? Do they have a walker? Do they have a wheelchair? Have they been to the doctor? Have they been assessed? Okay, and so these are all the things that you want to think about, because for an elderly person to have a need and not have it addressed is abuse. Okay, just like with a child or any other person who has an injury, delaying treatment is abusive. Okay, now here are some more indicators of elder abuse, and they may or may not be directly associated with domestic violence. Okay, the caregiver resisting the visitation by others. So the caregiver not wanting anyone to come visit or see. I'm not talking about limiting one person who may be a problem and a pain in the neck and disruptive and upsetting, but really, really coercively controlling who has access to the elderly person. The onset or presence of depression is another thing you want to look at. them changing their will or policies or powers of attorney to someone else's gain. Like all of a sudden, their third cousin twice removed is going to be the beneficiary for everything. Where did this person even come from? Under what conditions is this occurring? What are they being told? Who around them is trustworthy and who's not trustworthy? All right. And so even in domestic violence situations with people who are younger, you have that financial coercive control piece that is alive and well that takes place, where the person is able-bodied, they go out and they work 40 hours a week and they hand over their paycheck under duress, not because they have a mutual agreement and everybody thinks it's wonderful, but under duress, and then they don't have their needs met. You know, the light bill's still not getting paid. Groceries still aren't in the house. They don't have the things that they need. They don't have gas to put in the car to go to the job to get the check to turn it over. Okay, so financial abuse is a very, very key indicator that something else is probably going on. All right. So the sudden changing of wills or policies and things like that, frequent sleepiness or confusion, disorderly, unclean, or unsafe environment. And although we're talking about older adults, this can apply to anyone. So these are the things that you want to look for. Gradual or abrupt financial deterioration that's unrelated to their basic need. Okay, so they used to have $10,000 in the bank. Now they only have $1,000 in the bank, and it's not because they bought something that you can see that costs $9,000. The money is just gone. Where did it go? Okay, pressure marks, abrasions. We've talked about this before. Pressure marks or abrasions. What else? Oh, stealing or selling household goods or personal possessions. When things start disappearing, right? Things start disappearing. The jewelry starts disappearing. Appliances start disappearing. Family heirlooms start disappearing is an indication that something's going on, okay? Chronic or unexplained infections. Failing to provide proper, timely nutrition or hydration, okay? Inappropriate or sudden redistribution or assignment of assets. All of a sudden, everything's being left to someone else. All of a sudden, okay. And again, this can hold true for younger people as well. All of a sudden, things are getting signed over. All of a sudden, they don't have a car anymore. The car's in someone else's name. What is really going on? We really need to purpose in our hearts to ask more questions than we ask, to explore a little bit further than what we tend to explore, and maybe not accept the first answer that we are provided, okay, when we do ask, okay. The home lacks basic necessities. They don't have adequate food. They don't have adequate hydration. They don't have what they need. Maybe the power is out. What is going on? Where are their resources going? Okay, who has control of that? Extreme weight loss. If they appear to be upset, agitated, non-communicative, or non-responsive, they seem more withdrawn, all right, more irritable. That's something that you want to pay attention to. You want to think about identity theft, forging signatures, or added names on signature cards, and especially like insurance policies and things like that, okay? Inadequate clothing or covering. It's 30 degrees and they don't have a coat. That's a problem, okay? Confinement, desertion, or abandonment. Restraint by physical or chemical means. What does that mean? That means literally restraining them, tying them to the bed, tying them in a chair. And there are younger abuse victims who experience this very same thing. And so older adults experience these things as well. That's really the point that we're trying to drive home. Everything that is experienced by younger people can be experienced by older people as well. So lack of hygiene, being left dirty or unbathed. If they wear glasses, the glasses being broken, or the frames being broken or twisted, or other signs of some kind of a disturbance, them not having the things that they need. If they wear dentures, they don't have them. If they have dentures, they're broken. You know, how did that happen? All right. Habitual blaming or scapegoating by others, constantly blaming things on them, falls, fractures, dislocations, or unusual bruising, And again, this is tricky because older people oftentimes lose their footing and they may frequently fall. But again, why are they falling? Do they not have a walker? Do they not have adequate assistance? What is the reason for all of this falling? And don't count on the doctor to get to the bottom of it if you do take them to the doctor, okay? Someone needs to ask specifically, are they being mistreated? Is someone hurting you? Is someone hitting you? Is someone being mean to you? These specific questions need to be asked, okay? And don't accept a passive, no answer, you know what I'm saying? No, I'm fine, if there's evidence to indicate otherwise, all right? Exploitation or misuse of personal funds or checking accounts, withdrawal from normal activities where they just don't want to be bothered, because oftentimes depression will set in, just as it will with any victim of abuse, okay? Isolating from family, friends, or activities that you know that they really enjoy. Bruising or bleeding around the breast, genital, or rectal areas. These are all things that should sound an alarm and send up red flags. The important thing to remember is this: when you're talking about domestic violence, and you're talking about this in terms of, hey Regina, hey Ken, when you're talking about that in terms of older adults, many professionals, therapists, medical doctors, family practitioners don't assess for domestic violence. They assume that any violence that the elderly is experiencing is a subset of abuse that happened because of caregiver stress or caregiver burnout, in which case they may say, we're going to send someone into the home to provide respite care. But they still live with this abuser, okay? They still are around this abuser. Miss you too, Regina. And so resources are being applied, but they're not the appropriate resource for the issue at hand, okay? Am I making that clear? And so I want us to be more attentive when we're dealing with older adults. I want us to understand that they will very well not be forthcoming about the abuse that they're suffering. 9 times out of 10, especially if they've been with their partner for 20, 30, 40 years, they're not going to acknowledge that they've been mistreated the entire time. They may not even recognize that it was maltreatment, okay? But it doesn't make it any less lethal. It doesn't make it any less lethal. Only 1 out of 24 cases of elder abuse is even reported. We've talked about why. 2/3 of perpetrators are adult children or spouses. That blew my mind. So these are people that the victim has an expectation that they can trust, okay? And these are the people who are taking advantage of them, redirecting their finances, verbally abusing them, physically abusing them, in some instances sexually abusing them. And the likelihood that they're going to report it is slim to none, okay? Murder-suicide is rare in the general population, although we see it happening with greater frequency, but there's even a greater occurrence of it in older adults, and we've talked about the reasons for that, okay? So if you have any questions, feel free to pop them up here, and I will come back on and address them to the best of my ability. We absolutely covered your prayers, because God is doing some amazing things. I mean, our mind is just blown by what He's shown us that He wants us to do. But, you know, we embrace it. We have a charge to keep and a God to glorify. We have been called to help people get free from anything really that's binding them up, causing them not to understand who they are in God, that they have a God-given destiny and a purpose, that it does not include being abused. And for the person now who's out there who's thinking, well, if this isn't God's will for my life, why did He send this person? And the answer to that is He didn't send that person. You picked that person. And for the person who's saying, well, I didn't pick that person. Well, then the person picked you and you stayed picked. That's what happened. Okay? God does not need to send a nightmare into our life. For what? Why would He need to do that? Okay? Christ died so that we would have life and have it more abundantly. That does not include being maltreated. But there are consequences for the choices that we make. For the people that we choose, for the people that we allow to choose us and we stay chosen, when we stay too long, when we don't have a safety plan, when we don't get into our word and find out what it truly says, to us, when we listen to mama and them as opposed to what God is saying. Okay. And so this conspiracy of silence is a silent epidemic within the church, across denominational lines, across racial lines. So the Baptists can't point their fingers at the Church of God in Christ, and Church of God in Christ can't point their fingers at the Catholics, okay? Because it's everywhere. And it's not okay. And it's not okay. I was just reading yesterday that a young lady turned 20. She had not been 24 hours when she was shot and killed by an abusive boyfriend that her family had warned her about, and who, ironically, she had done a video of him loading a weapon, the same weapon that he killed her with a few hours later. So trauma bonding is real, people. Trauma bonding is real. Domestic violence is real. Abuse in later life is real, and it is lethal. And typically it doesn't stop until someone is dead. And that needs to stop. And it's more prevalent in the church than outside of the church, okay? And so we are charged with raising awareness concerning this. Next year we will begin to travel globally. We've accepted invitations in Africa and in the South Pacific to provide training and to raise awareness. And so we covered your prayers. Know that we are praying for you. We just believe God. We just believe God. If you have found that you're in a situation that is abusive, okay, you can inbox me. You can subscribe to our blog, Judah's Roar, at www.judahsroar.com. I will put all that information in the comments when we're done, and you will get emailed directly to you a template, a worksheet for a safety plan. If you're in an abusive situation and you choose to remain, you need a safety plan. If you are in an abusive situation and you are leaving tonight, you need a safety plan. If you're in an abusive situation and you're going to leave at some point, you need a safety plan. If you were in an abusive situation and you have left your abuser, okay, aside from that moment in time when you were actually physically leaving, you are in a heightened state of danger for 30 to 90 days after you actually separate from your abusive partner. All right? Because they're not going to appreciate that you woke up and got out. Okay? So be aware of that. Know that. Know also that 20% of domestic violence homicide victims are not just the victim themselves. They are innocent bystanders. They are family members who chose to help. They are first responders, okay? So everyone around you is in jeopardy. You need a safety plan. If someone tells you, just get out, you need a plan. You need a plan, okay? So you can contact the hotline.org. That's the National Domestic Violence Hotline. You can contact shelters, domesticshelters.org. There's help out there. Connect with a DV advocate in your area. If you're struggling with that and just can't think it through or whatever, inbox me and I will help get you connected to someone that can help you. But God does not intend for you to live under the thumb of another human being. That was never his intention. He did not send them into your life. Okay? He did not. The Bible declares that the Lord has said in Hosea that my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. Most times people stop right there. But there's not a period there, beloved. There's a semicolon, which means that that's not a complete thought. My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge because they have rejected knowledge. So it's not that we don't know. That's not what causes us the problem. It's once we are presented with an opportunity to know and we reject it for whatever reason. We reject it because Mama said I should stay. We reject it because whatever we think is a good reason. Once we reject knowledge, we have positioned ourselves really for destruction. Okay? That's our choice. That's our choice. So our goal and our mandate and our mantle is to raise awareness about this, and frankly to hold church leadership, ministry leaders, secular leaders accountable for sharing this information with their congregations and for doing something besides sprinkling oil on them and saying a prayer and sending them back into the belly of hell after the benediction. Okay, so our goal is to get people free, to raise awareness, okay, to ignite hearts, enlighten minds, and safeguard destinies. That's our call. That's our mandate. I am Apostle Cheryl L. Richardson. I love you from the bottom of my heart. I know God has an awesome plan for your life because he said so. And if you are being abused, that is not part of his plan. All right? That's not part of his plan. Can he bring you out of it? Yes. Can he redeem the time? Absolutely. Can you have an amazing life afterwards? Absolutely. All right? But it's going to take time, and it's going to take you making a conscious decision to believe God. And believing God doesn't mean that you sit in a deadly situation and just believe God. Okay? Faith without works is dead. So what can you do in the interim? In the interim, you can educate yourself. In the interim, you can join a support group. We have a faith-based closed group on Facebook called Dominion Over Domestic Violence. The Lord has instructed us that it is not to be a humongous 1,000-member group because we can't maintain safety for victims in there, and we want people to be able to share their story. If you are a ministry leader, you are a first lady, a pastor's wife, you are an apostle, prophet, teacher, evangelist, you are the church, a psalmist, you are a minstrel in the church, the group is open to you. If you have a history of domestic violence and you want to be able to lend support and to encourage others, you're welcome in our group. If you join our group and you find out, you know what, I need some support myself, then that's all right too, because we'll provide that as well. Amen. So we want you to be encouraged on today. Know what to look for in terms of abuse in later life. Go back, do a search. You can check our other videos. We've done like 23 or 24 videos now on various topics that pertain to domestic violence. All right. We are passionate about this, and we are anointed to address it. All right. And we will not go sit down and shut up. Those of you who really know me know that's not an option. All right. This is Apostle Cheryl L. Richardson. We will be back on next week with another Shatter the Silence, and we will examine another aspect of domestic violence. Blessings to you.